This is the Metal Gateway Podcast.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Metal Gateway. This week on the show, I'm delighted to share my interview with CJ Yacoub. CJ and I met and recorded this conversation in June of 2023 at the Cascadian Midsummer Festival, which takes place in a mossy, temperate rainforest in southwestern Washington state. Small disclaimer, this recording was made outdoors, so periodically you're going to hear some festival-related activity in the background, some distant music, perhaps. Yeah, so anyway, CJ is a drummer who currently plays in a couple of different bands. They are in a band called Vulning. Vulning is an atmospheric black metal band from Columbus, Ohio. They recently dropped a split with Sadness, a black gaze project also from Ohio. They are also the drummer of Canis Dirus, a Minnesota-based black metal band whose most recent full-length release is available from Bindrune Recordings. I will include links to all of these things I just mentioned in the show notes. For those of you who listened to the first 3 episodes, and I thank you for that, by the way, if you listened to those episodes and thought that this podcast was just going to be me, a Gen X dude, interviewing a bunch of other Gen X dudes, well, that's not the case. Going from last week's interview with Joseph Schaefer, who's a millennial, to this week's episode, where I interviewed CJ, who is the first member of Gen Z that I've interviewed for the show. So that's kind of neat, I think, anyway. One of my goals, really, for this show is I want to hear from a broad range of perspectives and voices, so I will be interviewing people who are not Gen X white dudes. And that started last week, and it's going to continue today, and I will continue that throughout the life of this show. That is my promise to you. I saw a quote a little while back that said something like, if you're over 40 and you don't have an under 30 mentor, and mentor, not mentee, you're going to miss out on fundamental shifts in thinking that are happening. I've really taken that quote to heart in several aspects of my life and have been making a real concerted effort to listen to younger people and learn from them. So CJ is one of those, and I've just felt like I was honored to have the opportunity to chat with them last summer. So I hope that you find our conversation interesting and that you learn something from them too. Enjoy the show. CJ, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a real fun weekend. We're here at Cascadian Midsummer in the Washington wilderness. We're currently sitting in the woods underneath a mossy-covered cedar tree, and it is an absolutely beautiful location. And so thank you for being on the show.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to ramble about my music journey.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's waste no time. Tell me, CJ, what was your gateway? What was your metal gateway? What was the metal that got you here?
Paul Di'Anno's sweet, soothing voice over Dave Murray's beautiful guitar licks on Prowler by Iron Maiden.
Now that is a story to begin with, especially when I consider that album, because I happen to know, I won't necessarily reveal exactly how old you are unless you want to do that yourself.
Oh, I don't mind.
But what I'm going to say is that's an album that came out quite a long time before you were born.
Indeed.
So I want to know how you came to discover that album. So tell me.
Yeah. So, and for reference, I'm 21 at the time of this recording.
So you were born in 2001.
Born in October of 2001 in Tampa Bay, Florida, in the hotbed of death metal.
Yeah.
Historically, but funny enough, that's not where I get my music taste from. I pretty much can credit it to my dad, as well as my mom for putting up with it and tolerating it and encouraging it. But my metal story really does start with my dad. He was born and raised in Montreal. In 1969, I believe, and he lived there for the first 25-ish years of his life. And growing up, he just kind of fell in love with metal, turned into a total Metallica kid, Iron Maiden kid. As I mentioned to you yesterday, he was seeing Voivod in tiny little bars when no one fucking knew who they were back then.
That must have been incredible.
Yeah.
When Voivod was a local band in Montreal, that must have been
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, I feel lucky that I got to see them in the 80s, but to see them when they were like playing clubs and, you know, little shows back in the early days, that must have been incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
I'd love to interview your dad sometime.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sick.
Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, so that's how he kind of got started. And given that I haven't spoken to him in a little while, actually, I don't know the rest of the specifics there, but fast forward many, many, many years, you know, his life brings him to Florida, meets my mom, and I'm about 5 or 6 years old, I believe. And at that time, I didn't really have any interests or fixations other than going to the ocean. I think at one point I thought about being a surfer when I was that young.
Yeah.
You know, when you're living on the Gulf Coast like that. But one day, my dad was taking me, I think, to his job for something, just coming to the office with him, and we were driving over the Howard Franklin Bridge, and if you know anything, it takes like 20, 30 minutes to cross it. So we're driving over Tampa Bay, and just out of the blue, hey, have I showed you this yet? No? And Prowler comes on, and I remember sitting in the passenger seat with that on, and that was just, it just sucked me right in. Like, it was energetic and cool, and not to mention the freaking guitar tones on that album are just so sick. Given that as a debut, it's hard for me to really go back and remember the magic of that moment because it was just, you know, I was so young.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be one of your earliest memories.
Yeah, it probably is. But I remember falling in love with that band very quickly. Kind of got me into rock and roll and that whole thing. And you're really going to laugh at this part. They're not even the band that made me want to be a drummer. Around the same time, like Rock Band and Guitar Hero was a really big thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I want to play this. And after doing that for a little bit, seeing the animations of the drumming dude play, I was like, oh, I want to play the drums. And Rock Band had like a drum mode. And I tried that out like once or twice. I was like, okay, I'm going to be a drummer. But this was all in the span of like 6 or so months. So I get Iron Maiden as my main dose. And then I'm getting some classics like from some like classics 80s and 90s hair metal, rock and roll and metal stuff.
And
like,
this is mostly coming from your dad.
Yeah,
still,
it's
right?
all from my dad. And my mom shared a lot of that kind of stuff. I know she was really, really into Journey and Typo Negative. Funny enough, she was super into like the gothic stuff, but she also loved Iron Maiden just as much as my dad did.
Can I just back up for a minute?
Yes.
You just said Journey and Typo Negative.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay.
Those are the two bands I remember her listening to
I'm kind
all
of
the time.
I'm kind of like loving your mom right now too. This is really cool. Like because that's a pair of bands. Like that's a real interesting pair.
Yeah.
Right. That's okay. Anyway, sorry.
And it kind of described the two sides of my mom now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's kind of where it was started. And I was very, very lucky enough to have not only parents who encouraged the music taste, but also the drumming. And the two, given that I'm a lifelong musician, the two of them are kind of very intertwined with each other.
Yeah.
But that's where it started. And I pretty exclusively listened to Iron Maiden for a very, very long time because, you know, when you're that young and you find some band with 15 albums out at that point, it's 15 albums, I think.
Yeah.
Everything up to A Matter of Life and Death had been out.
Yep.
I can't pinpoint the exact year, but I got into them at some point between 2007 or 2009-ish, right? You know, late 2000s, before Final Frontier came out, because that was the first record I ever remember being excited to be released, and I was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Iron Maiden era lasted quite a long time. I just consumed every single song of theirs. I can pick out an Iron Maiden song 5 seconds into it starting out of any of their records.
Right.
I just know them that well. Nico's style of drumming was what really got me into that. That was my first influence. He was the first drummer I started to play after. Like Run to the Hills was a big song I wanted to play. Like the big tom runs, like
Yeah.
You know, younger CJ loved that stuff.
Yeah.
Eventually, as I grew older, you know, wanted to kind of branch out and do my own thing. And the first band I ran into that didn't come from my parents or just from my childhood, funny enough, was Avenged Sevenfold. Somebody in like 3rd or 4th grade was like, oh, you're into metal? Yeah, check out this band. And again, I think Nightmare had just come out. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely a pretty formative band for me. You know, a lot of elitists hate them. I can't stand them anymore. I hate M. Shadow's vocals, but like every time I go back, I can't help but admire some of the songwriting and especially the drumming. Mm-hmm. The Rev was another big kick in the balls for me. It's like, oh, the drumming can get even faster and more intense. You know, that was some of the first double kick I had ever heard. Very, very soon after Avenged Sevenfold came into my life, Dream Theater did too. And Dream Theater was there in like a little sense. I knew a couple songs, but I really fell in love with Metropolis Part 2. That was probably the first like album that really took over my life to a crazy degree.
And what drew you in about it?
The story. That was the album that made me fall in love with not only songwriting in general, but concept records and long songs. And to this day, I still find myself preferring blatant storytelling and long songs and big, grandiose, dramatic stuff. You know, like if I see a 20-minute track on an album, I'm like, fuck yeah, can't wait to get to that song. That'll be awesome. That'll be epic.
Yeah.
And obviously Iron Maiden has their fair share of really long songs, especially in the post 2000s era with the return of Bruce. You know, they go north of 10 minutes all the time. And
yeah, there's a couple of 13-minute songs on Book of Souls.
Yeah, and of course there's the epics like Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, Alexander the Great. You know, I've always been a sucker for the longer epic songs. Dream Theater really, really propelled that for me. And again, that was another big step in my drumming adventure because suddenly time signatures and weird feelings and weird song structures were introduced to me and things that weren't blatantly metal all the time. Progressive rock and progressive metal elements were being introduced to me and these different ideas. And suddenly I had a lot of complicated music to chew on. And I would just listen to this over and over and over again, trying to figure it out and feel it and understand it. So like, I'm figuring out some pretty complicated musical stuff when I'm like 10 because I just fell in love with it. And again, this is something I don't mind admitting. I know that I am neurodivergent and I have a tendency to hyperfixate on things. I have a tendency to ramble and go on tangents about it too. That's definitely part of it.
Sure.
But I can't deny that that's definitely a big reason of why I got so hyperfixated onto music at such a young age, because it just took over my life and that's all I cared about. I just wanted to do what I heard on the drums.
And was it was a thing that it allowed you to sort of channel that and focus on the thing that you want, the problem you wanted to solve, which is like figuring out the song, figuring out the song, you know, mastering this complex polyrhythm or whatever it was, right? That's the big drummer brain part of me. That's that itch I'm always looking to scratch. Like now, I mean, as a quick reference, like nowadays I listen to some insanely rhythmically complicated stuff. Like Car Bomb is one of my favorite bands and biggest influences, and I'm not familiar with them.
It is like schizophrenic in how quickly ideas and meter and feel changes. Like their whole gimmick is messing with feel and tempo, and it's crazy. But I'll get there. Okay. But yeah, Dream Theater is definitely the one that kind of propelled me to think deeper about music from both a listener and a performer's perspective. This also came at a big change in my life. I moved away from Florida for the first time. So suddenly I'm kind of dealing with some strife and some hardship in my life for maybe the first time, and, you know, new challenges. I started falling into bands like Coheed and Cambria. I got into a couple other prog rock bands, prog metal bands. I got really into Rush at that time too. A lot of this was propelled by like my drumming interests. But around this same time is where I made a noticeable switch in my music taste, because I got really, really into, quote, big air quotes here, mainstream metal, the stuff you'd hear on the radio, new metal, metalcore. Slipknot was the band that kind of converted me from not liking screaming in music to being able to tolerate it to loving it.
Yeah.
Bands like Bullet for My Valentine, Five Finger Death Punch, and at this time I was living in England, and the metal scene there is crazy awesome. I went to Download Festival that year because Iron Maiden happened to be playing.
And you're how old at this point?
Oh, this was Download 2013, so I would have been 11.
So you're going to Download Festival at age 11.
11. It's my very first festival.
Wow.
I guess I skipped over my first concert experience. I think I saw Iron Maiden for the first time in 2009, and then I saw them in 2011, both in Tampa. The first one was in Detroit, Michigan. We were visiting some family. They happened to be there. Then I saw them in Tampa Bay, hometown. That was great, obviously. Me and my dad got like way up to the front because, you know, it's Iron Maiden. You know, me and my dad were going nuts over that. But anyways, back into like this kind of new era of music listening I'm getting into. At this point, all my music taste is kind of on me. I'm doing all my own exploration. Given that I grew up with a rectangle in my phone with all the music in the world at my fingertips, I had YouTube and the internet and my dad buying digital copies of anything I asked him to basically just keep digging forever. And I had like all of this, you know, this whole world of metal bands in front of me that I could chew on. And it was so awesome. I just kind of kept digging into that. And that lasted for like 3 or 4 years. I was listening to relatively surface level, relatively accessible metal, and everything started to change around 2016, 2017-ish when Gojira came into my life. I saw Gojira on a flyer for a festival that used to be called Rock on the Range. It's now called Sonic Temple. It's held in Columbus, Ohio. And I saw that band. I was like, oh, that's a cool band name. And I look them up, and people were comparing them to Mastodon, which was one of my favorite bands that I kind of discovered through that previous era of like me being in middle school and listening to some more surface level metal.
Well, and also being a drummer.
That too.
If you're a drummer who's into metal, like, and you listen to Mastodon, you're gonna be fascinated by the things that Braun does. So,
and to backpedal real quick, as I guess I forgot to mention this, Mastodon had a massive influence on how I on my metal taste. Braun, like you mentioned, is not only an epic drummer, but he's the one who really solidified to me that, hey, I can also sing and drum if I really want to. And now that's a thing that I do in almost every project I'm in, like, that's like my bread and butter now. It's awesome that like, Braun was the guy who was like, oh, I want to do that because he does it. He makes it look cool. But yeah, Mastodon was a huge influence for me as a drummer and a musician and my music taste too, because it's Mastodon. They do weird stuff. I love their longer songs. The Czar is my favorite Mastodon song. Little anecdote, but I
can't argue with that. That's a good choice.
But yeah, when I was reading about Gojira and they were making a lot of comparisons to Mastodon, I was like, okay, I got to try this out. They're going to go to this festival. They have a name that's similar to Godzilla. I'm a huge Godzilla fan. I grew up on all the old Toho movies from Japan that suck, and I love them. They're so cheesy. But yeah, The Art of Dying kind of changed my life forever because I never knew drumming could be like that. I had never heard any death metal before. I had never heard any black metal. I had never heard drums not only be that fast, like during the big climax of that song where Joe is screaming about dying. Not only was it the crazy double kicks and the crazy blast beats in there, but it was the way that song was written. It was like this massive emotional buildup through composed for the whole band for this one huge cathartic release, and then there was a big come down, and I had never seen a song structure like that. I had never seen anyone tell that kind of story through music, and the way the drums propelled that further totally captivated me, and I wanted more extremity in the music that I listened to because I wanted it to go further. So pretty quickly that kind of stuff led me, and it's like, okay, how do I get deeper into this? I'm doing some pretty surface level research, and people are like, go listen to Opeth. Go listen to Opeth. That's the perfect gateway from, and especially all my buddies who knew I was into progressive metal. They're like, you will eat this up. And I took one quick listen to Blackwater Park, and I was like, yep, I'm in.
Yeah, quick little anecdote about a description of Opeth that was given to me. Oddly enough, and the reason I thought of this is because you're a drummer. So I was in a death grind band in the 80s back when I was in high school, and the drummer in our band is a guy named Carl Cumpy, and at some point I'm probably going to interview Carl for this podcast because he's a really interesting dude. But anyway, he and I were talking about Opeth, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, and he said to me, he says, Opeth is just unimpeachable. Like, there's just you can't touch them. Like, they're they're perfect. It's like a perfect band.
Here's my for me, the mark of a truly generational band, artist, whatever, is if you can go to every single release / record they've ever put out, if you can find like one song on each record that makes you think, damn, this might be the best song they ever wrote. I have that with Opeth.
Yeah.
Every single album has at least one, and I know there's plenty of people who have strong feelings about certain eras of Opeth and how they feel about that, but like I mean, if you like even one album from that band, like, good, like, great, they're good for you.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I like, as a vinyl collector, for example, I mean, I'm not a hyper completist with much in terms of like
same. I have a couple, but yeah.
But Opeth is one of those bands. I have every single one of their albums on vinyl because and part of the reason for my vinyl collecting is like I want to basically make sure, like, when the apocalypse happens, I don't want them to be able to take away my music from me, because it's like I'll be able to have an analog source, for my favorite shit. So I've been slowly building all these like albums that I'm like, okay, one of my criteria for buying most albums on vinyl is would I need this after the apocalypse? Right?
I need to start asking myself.
So
that.
it's a
That's
question,
great
because
question to
otherwise
ask
I just
yourself.
buy everything, and it's just like, and then I'm broke, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, Opeth is one of those bands.
Yeah.
Like, I have to have their entire discography on vinyl because, like you said, every single era has something in it that I need.
Yeah.
Every single era, the old stuff, the new stuff, and everything in between.
Yep.
The other band that I just immediately comes to mind that is a completist band for me is, and this will come as no surprise, but it's Bolt Thrower.
Yeah, I know you're such a bolt thrower nut.
So anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, of course. I love hearing about, if anything, everyone's got so many Opeth opinions and stories, because like they're just everywhere. And I love hearing about that band. It's one of my favorite bands to talk about. But yeah, so Opeth, you know, as you can tell, there's a bit of a through line here. I tend to prefer progressive stuff, no matter what's coming through.
And you know, the stuff that you're telling me about, you know, it tracks for me because every single one of those bands has a drumming element to it that's, you know, drumming forward, if you will, or it's a band where the drums are, you know, certainly, I mean, I don't think there's any band where the drums are really an afterthought, but there's some bands that are known for their riffs and their vocals, and there are other bands that, you know, they're known for those things, and they're really known for their drumming. And every band you've mentioned, from Iron Maiden to Avenged Sevenfold,
even the ones
to Mastodon,
even the ones I've forgotten to mention to you that I know I'm into, like Tool, Danny Carey.
You can't have this conversation without talking about Tool.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rush. You can't you can't have this conversation. And I could probably start talking about other bands where I think of, okay, for drumming, and you'd be like, yep, I'm into them too.
I've cried for one, big air quotes here, celebrity death in my life, and it was the Professor Neil Peart.
Yeah.
That was the one that hit me.
I mean, those
and
are
when Nico
real.
McBrain dies, it's probably going to happen again, because with him being an Iron Maiden and being my first love, I can see that. But it's funny you bring that up, because actually getting into extreme metal, you would think that that would continue, the drumming obsession. And it did. Like, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I developed a new love for quite the opposite. So, and I'll get there in a second when I start getting into like black and doom metal, because that's right around the corner. Opeth really took over my life with my freshman year of high school. The summer leading up to that, and then that whole year. So that would be 2016 for me, and then into the spring of 2017. And at that point, I felt like I was finally ready to make the jump into proper death/black metal and really see what it was all about. And I actually tried death metal first. I went for some classics like Cannibal Corpse, especially because I knew my dad and Paul from Cannibal Corpse were friends, actually. They went to the same hockey rink together. Again, with my dad being from Montreal, total hockey nerd. He owned,
in Tampa, right?
Yeah,
Because,
and Tampa's got the Lightning, and it's a huge hockey town there too. And
indeed.
yeah, growing up in the death metal capital of the world, or one of them at least, you know, like
or the death metal capital of the U.S. For
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
right.
So yeah, my dad and Paul Mazurkowitz became pretty good friends. And again, a little quick anecdote. Turns out I played on his kid at one point, I think, when I was much, much younger and had no idea who that was. My dad was like, hey, come over to my friend's house. He's got a huge drum set for you to play on. You'll love it. And all I remember is just playing on like the craziest drum set I've ever seen, and then going home and not really seeing him again. And then, like, after doing some digging through my brain, I'm like, oh my God, I think that was Paul. Like,
Yeah.
And when I finally saw Cannibal Corpse all these years later, and I actually got to talk to him, and we it was like, oh yeah, I remember, you know, got to catch up a little bit. That was an awesome moment. But so with Opeth, kind of, with me making my rounds with Opeth and, you know, kind of consuming that band and being like, okay, I'm ready to finally make the jump. I actually looked around YouTube, funny enough, for some recommendations and of where to start. And during that process, Emperor was the big one for black metal. Cannibal Corpse didn't really sit right with me when I first tried. And death metal I'm only now really starting to get into death metal. Immolation and Death and Blood Incantation have been, you know, a bit of gateways for me, but it's going to be I think it's going to be a bit more longer before I get into more death metal bands. But black metal was definitely my first love. Emperor brought me in with the just ferocity and the insanity and the keys. And the vocals were mind-blowing, and thankfully Emperor, quote unquote thankfully, but I've never been a huge fan of the gimmicky stuff for black metal. Like, I get it. I'm not going to be turned off by it or anything, but Emperor was relatively classy and clean and pretty well put together, so it didn't like scare me off or anything.
Yeah, it wasn't campy like Immortal or whatever.
And was I into Leprous at that time? I can't remember. I think at the same time I was really getting into this band Leprous, and their vocalist used to play keys for Emperor live.
Yeah.
But Emperor really started the downward spiral of wanting to get into black metal. And very quickly after that, I bumped into The Mantle by Agalloch, and I have never been the same person since. That is the album that stopped my drumming obsession exclusively, because that record's drumming is super minimalistic. And I kind of started falling in love with music that spoke to a very deeper spiritual sense. I had never really had that with music before. I always had stuff that was really engaging and interesting and cool and technical, but also emotional. You know, I'd always loved that kind of stuff, but The Mantle was something else for me.
That album is.
Yeah. I didn't know music could do that before that. It hit me at a very, very impressionable time in my life. It's the sole reason I'm into folk. It's the sole reason I'm into atmospheric and folk black metal. And once I got into that, I pretty much just dove head first into all the folky atmospheric black metal bands, especially in the Pacific Northwest region. Aldo and Falls of Raros were pretty quick after that. And I kind of just kept going down the rabbit hole there. And later that year, you're going to love this one. My very first Funeral Doom record that I heard was Angels of Distress by Shape of Despair. My very first Funeral Doom record I fell in love with was fucking Mirror Reaper by Bellwitch, which is one hell of a place to start.
Yeah, I'll say.
And yeah, it's still in my top 5 records of all time at this point. If it's too slow and boring for you, I get it. I can't sit down and listen to that record just anytime.
No, I can't either. I was actually just thinking about this because Bellwitch is playing later tonight, and I was just over talking to Jesse.
I think they're doing new stuff. I think they're doing Clandestine Gate tonight.
Yeah, they've got a new thing, but I saw them. I don't remember when it was anymore. All the shows run together for me, but this was 4 or 5 years ago, and I saw them, and they played at a small club in the town where I live, and they played Mirror Reaper. And I remember as I'm sitting here watching this, and I'm watching this whole thing unfold, and I'm like listening to this like sonic landscape that they're painting with that song. And it occurs to me, this is the first time in my life I've ever sat and like listened to like an hour plus long set in air quotes from a band. And at the end of it, I realize this is their last song. This is their only song. This is the song. This is the set. And I'm like, I've never had that experience before.
They come off more like pieces, as in like a classical piece.
Yeah, it's like a symphony.
It's so
in a way,
long form.
Is that, there's movements and there's, themes and there's variations that go throughout.
Yeah.
And then they come back to things and
I could sit here and I could talk about that album for an hour. But
we should not. We should do that another time.
Yeah, that's another time. But I think I'm going to wrap this up with kind of the now era that I'm in, which started around 2017.
Yeah, and I also want to talk some bit about your music projects, because I want to talk about stuff that you're working on now and kind of how all of this like music fan stuff connects to the work you're doing. If
anybody who listens to my work, especially drummers who listen to me, they can all tell that they know where my influences are.
Yeah.
And like it's something I'm proud of. I love talking about, the stuff that influenced me. But as I was saying, Agalloch kind of made me want to jump neck deep into like folky black metal and woodsy black metal, stuff like that. Just stuff that was inspired by like the natural world. Wolves in the Throne Room really stood out to me there too. Seor stood out to me as well. And again, I'm glancing over like mind-blowing, life-changing bands here for the sake of brevity. And this is all just kind of blowing my mind, taking over my life again. And I'm kind of falling in love with these records and these albums for the way they make me feel. And it's a much more atmospheric and emotional and spiritual experience. It's really, really immersive. And this was in a time in my life where I was able to give enough attention and investment into these records to really have for it to be rewarding. I was just in high school and wasn't fucking paying attention to my teachers. I just had my headphones in all day and just trying to get through it. So my big distraction was, this really, really immersive music. And this all kind of led me to bump into some weirdo Kentucky black metal band called Panopticon. And when I first heard Roads to the North, I thought the whole banjo black metal thing was a bit too campy and it just didn't work. I thought the ideas were interesting and a lot of it really, really worked, but some of it didn't. And I kept revisiting it every once in a while, liking it just a little bit more, and just a little bit more, and just a little bit more. And eventually I got sucked into the rest of his stuff. And this is all around the same time Scars of Man got announced for release. So now we're up to, early 2018. And the combination of that record coming out right as I'm getting into the band, and then at that point, Roads to the North, and I'd kind of fallen in love with it. It had just grown on me, and I kind of started to get it and understand it. And I didn't think the banjo stuff was all campy. I was like, wait, this kind of fucking works. And it feels like something I've never heard before. I've never felt this before. And that 1-2 punch kind of started to solidify that band as one of my favorites. And then over the course of that summer and then into the winter, come 2019, Panopticon took over my life. And I had listened to all, at that time, 8 albums a million times. I had them. I started collecting them. That Panopticon is the reason I started getting into vinyl, because I was like, I need to own these. And I knew I always wanted to have a vinyl collection, but that was the band that made me pull the trigger and start it.
Interesting.
One of my very first day where I had any records, it was my birthday. My mom gave me Number of the Beast and $100 and told me to go to Used Kids Records. And I came back with I think I came back with Iron Maiden self-titled. And then I used the rest of the money to go to Bindrune and ordered 3 Panopticon records.
That'll work.
And yeah, some of that came out of my pocket. But yeah, Panopticon kind of took over my life at that point. And I'd say even to this day, it's still my favorite band. Iron Maiden is in that weird position where I'll never not enjoy them. Every single song I love. I didn't really like the new album, by the way, but I don't want to talk about that. There's some good songs on there. It's still Iron Maiden. But yeah, it's kind of where I'm at now. Musically, I've kind of been left with this two phases of me, where a lot of the music I listen to is either for like deep immersion and emotional fulfillment, or the other side of it is a lot of it's my drummer brain trying to pick it apart and understand it. Because also during this time, I've been bettering myself as a musician and a drummer, and I've been getting into some really, really technical and difficult bands like Car Bomb I mentioned earlier. I'm a pretty decent fan of Between the Buried and Me, just kind of depending on what they're doing. And at the very least, there's plenty of bands that I don't like that I can appreciate on like a technical level, on like a songwriting level, and can see their ideas and like, maybe I should try this, but do this instead. Because I've always known I wanted to be in a band. And for my whole life, as soon as I started drumming, it's like, I want to be in a band, I want to be a touring musician, I want to do the rock star thing, right? And as I got older and I was able to refine that idea of dream job a little bit more and make it a little bit more realistic and start actually working on music with some friends, in high school, meeting Joe and having Jonathan in my life, my 2 main musical collaborators, has been the greatest blessing I could ever ask for. And given that the 3 of us, along with some friends of ours, put out 2 albums and an EP while we were in high school and graduating out of high school, no one was older than 22, 23 in the band. The fact that we pulled it off at this age is insane. And I am beyond proud, even though that band is behind us now. But it's done amazing things for me, because now I play drums in Canis Dirus, and I never would have had that opportunity if we weren't playing shows in the Columbus area and Rob didn't introduce himself to me. And I wouldn't have all the session work that I have now. I do all the drums for Robes of Snow. I've done some stuff for Escaping Aghartha. Avery, if you're listening to this, I love you, buddy.
Shout out to Avery.
And there's a bunch of others that I know that I'm forgetting, and I'm going to feel like a dickhead for not mentioning them. But yeah, my drumming these days, I love to make and participate in this really emotionally moving music, but I don't want to drum like John Hamm from Agalloch. I want to drum like me. And I kind of drum like, all the drummers I've mentioned so far. I've kind of collected them all. But this is actually a bit of a crazy coincidence. If anybody listening is big into Panopticon, me and Austin have a very similar style of drumming. It's very primal and just let it all flow out. But I also have a huge love of jazz that I got from playing in jazz band through high school. Kind of made me a much better musician. So I taught myself how to play a little bit quieter and
jazz will do that.
Yeah, and now I try to incorporate basically every single style of drumming that I know how into my playing. I want to be the most diverse drummer I can be. I want as many tools in my toolbox as possible to give me more ways to elevate the song and elevate the music that my dear friends are so amazing at creating. Because right now in this moment, I'm not the best melodic composer. I can write a good lead here and there, but like when it comes to riffs, I'm not super knowledgeable. I mean, I know a good riff when I hear one, but that's just not my forte right now. My bread and butter is drum composition. I love composing drums for music. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my thing. That's my my big goal. I just want to be the best I can at that. And the music I've listened to has kind of led me to that, because if I can create a moving performance, if I can move a listener or an audience member emotionally to any degree, whether it's fun, whether it makes them want to move around and mosh, whether it makes them want to cry their eyes out, if they are moved and engaged and they walk away from the experience with a smile on their face, I'm happy. That's what I want. Also, I'll admit, drumming is a lot of fun, and I do it for selfish reasons because I like to go very fast and go ba 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 ba. It's really fun.
Yeah.
But to a deeper, like the really, really deep fulfillment is I want to give back. I want to give that feeling I get when I listen to those records I love so much. I want to give that back.
Yeah.
And if I can do that through drumming, then I'll take it any day.
Yeah.
And as a vocalist too, I sing and scream a lot too. If I can do it through that way, I'll do it too.
Yeah.
And I want to get more into guitar. I want to get more into. I completely missed the whole Irish folk tangent, but I'm also really into Irish folk. Listen to Lancome. All of you need to listen to Lancome. But that's another big part of me, and there's no drumming in all of that. It's really ambient stuff, or it's really, really primal stuff with a lot of singing. The greatest thing that ever happened to me is I branched out of metal, and I started listening to. I am no longer a metalhead. I am a music head. I want to listen to anything. Home base is metal, and I love bringing all those ideas that I learn back to metal to make it even better and more interesting. But yeah, that's kind of, I think that's most of the chronology that relates to both myself as a fan and as a composer and a drummer. That's kind of what put me where I'm at now. And I have the luxury of meeting awesome people like you at awesome festivals like this. And I also have the luxury of being able to call a lot of these bands and projects that I've been fans of for so long friends now. And we can all make music together and enjoy each other's music on such a deeper level. And the sense of community that I felt through this music, I'm now experiencing in real life. And it's amazing because, this festival's, again, without getting too into it, this festival's coming at a very pivotal time in my life. And I'm definitely feeling the love, and I love it. And it all comes from this dumb caveman music we love so much.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about, I was thinking about this last night as I was going to sleep, in this meadow in this gorgeous forest, Mm-hmm. And it hit me that one of the things that I love about festivals like this and this particular kind of scene, the scene of the bands, the bands and fans that congregate at festivals like this one, Cascadian Midsummer, like Fire in the Mountains.
Oh yeah, that was amazing last year.
and Northwest Terrorfest, even though Terrorfest is a different kind of vibe because it's an indoor festival, but these outdoor festivals in particular, one of the things I love so much about this is that truly there is no meaningful distinction between musicians and fans.
Yep, exactly.
At this festival. There is, you can watch, for a lot of people, a guy like Austin Lund is, a living legend.
Yeah.
And that's maybe, Austin would say I'm overstating that.
Yeah, but he's the most humble dude I've ever met.
Truly. But to a lot of people, he's made music, myself included. He's made music that is deeply meaningful on a very personal level. Is makes us like able to access really important emotions.
Speaking
for
of
us.
that, man, I don't know if I mentioned this, but that Roads to the North record that grew on me so much, it's my favorite record of all time now.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's ever getting taken down.
Exactly. So, I have a short
crazy how that works. That the first impression wasn't all that amazing, but now nothing could take that down.
No, it's fantastic.
But yeah, as you were saying.
So my point is, you can watch, like last night, we could watch Austin play an amazing set, an acoustic set, and an hour before that, he was in the audience with the rest of us watching another band.
Yeah, like I was moshing in a circle pit and he shoved me back into the pit.
Right,
like
exactly. So, and then, in the afternoon before the bands are playing, we were sitting around, just talking to the guy, and so there's no meaningful distinction between musician and fan. And that's my point about that is like, this is the kind of scene it's hard to replicate this in other ways. And I don't know, I think it's honestly one of the reasons for this project, this podcast, is the reason I wanted to take this sort of ethnographic and oral history approach and talking to metalheads about their own personal stories, their own personal journeys, is because I want to try to build a sense, like maybe a body of knowledge about what are the things that bind us together, right? Because we come here and, I've been going to festivals and shows like, this for long enough that, almost every place I go, I see somebody I like, oh, hey, I recognize somebody,
bumped into them somewhere,
some other
somehow.
fan. And because we all just kind of move in these same circles. And I'm trying to really get at, and this is why I love these conversations so much, is I'm trying to get at what are the things that unite us and bring us together and these like little ligaments that join us,
because it's all connected
places.
Like that's the big thing I'm realizing is like, holy shit, everyone just knows everybody.
Well, and every person who came to this festival came here along their own pathway, but they came here to watch these bands that are playing this weekend, and then next year they're going to be at some other place. These different group of people going to be at some other place watching a different group of bands, but they all came there for along their own path. And I really want to get a sense of where these pathways. I just really want to investigate these pathways, because I find that so fascinating. So that's the whole reason for this project. But anyway, this is a good place to wrap, and I'm probably going to cut a lot of that shit out that I just said. I just wanted to sort of talk to you about that on tape. But thank you for being on the show, and thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it, because I know you could be doing other things right now. So I really appreciate your time, and it's been really fun to get to know you this weekend and to like have this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, genuinely. Like, and I actually do want to mention this. So you mentioned the whole discovering and feeling, and especially at a festival like this, at a place like this, that the distinction between fan and artist kind of doesn't exist.
Correct.
And I came to that same realization about a year ago, I'd say, when I went to Fire in the Mountains, and that taught me that, like, wait, all these bands and musicians that I, look up to so much for this, that, or whatever reason, they are just as big of music nerds in the exact same way as me and you are.
Yep.
We're all like, we all were, 10, 15 years old in a mosh pit somewhere watching whatever favorite band it was for us when we were that young. And some of us who do choose to be musicians, and some of us are just lucky enough to get a following, whether, it's big or small. And some of us just, end up with that privilege. And for me, as someone who's trying, I want to be a professional touring musician in my life. And my goal is to get to that point. However, I don't want millions of people to know who I am. And, I don't want to be like the most famous drummer in the world. Like, I don't care about the fame and the admiration. If anything, like that prospect of being able to reach that many people, it's like, holy shit, like how many awesome stories can I hear from people? Like, I don't ever want to be unapproachable. The kind of kindness and family-like acceptance that I've been so lucky to receive from a lot of the bands that I've had the privilege to meet and become friends with over the last year and a half, I want to reciprocate that. I want to be that. I don't want to be anything but that. This is truly where like the love is and where the passion is, and it feels like doing music for not only myself but my friends is really what I want to do, and just kind of be all in this together. And it really, really helps with this big old sense of community that we're all just a bunch of nerdy dweebs who get together and, push each other around to heavy music. And I couldn't ask for anything more.
No, it's really great. And it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, I guess. I've been doing this a long time, and just going to metal shows and being a fan. And my days of being a musician are mostly in my past. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows?
You never know.
Who knows what the future
never
brings.
too late. I'll never say it's
I
too late
truly
for
believe
being a musician.
that. I think, there's a lot of people, I'm not the first person to say this, but like, it truly is never too late. And you are, I'm sorry, I just have to pause for a second.
I know, it caught me off guard too.
A fully naked woman just walked past us both. And that was really
I didn't really,
unusual.
wait, was she fully naked or just topless?
She was fully naked, and she was wearing shoes.
I'm letting her do it. Yeah, I wanted to just try to like pretend it didn't happen for the sake of this.
But that's okay. We're gonna edit that out.
Yeah.
That'll maybe go
as you were saying.
That'll go into blooper reel.
Yes.
So in any case, I don't remember where I was gonna go with that. It's not important.
You mentioned you had a quick question to ask me.
So I have one final question that I ask everybody on this podcast, and it's just a fun question, and I'm just throwing it out there. And so it's this. If you could have like dinner or drinks or whatever with any metal musician, living or dead, who would it be?
To be honest, I don't know what it is I would be looking to get out of it. maybe if it is just
interesting conversation, drumming tips. I don't know.
You know what? I'll give you 2 answers.
Okay, so dinner for 3. It's you and 2 others.
As a drummer, Neil Peart. Just because I don't want to. I mean, that was
explanation necessary.
I mean, he was a composer before a drummer, and I believe that I see myself as a composer before I'm a drummer, and it helps temper the drummer ego, thankfully, and kind of helps me write better parts. But other than that, I mean, I don't know. You know what? I think Neil Peart's an okay answer. I think I'm going to go with that because I can't think of anybody else.
I think that's a great answer, and it would be cool to have dinner with him, and especially now that he's gone.
I mean, I also like to write lyrics too, so like there would be a lot to talk about there. And also, I'd be interested to hear his story of getting into drumming. Talking to quote unquote pioneers of their instrument, like what inspired you? And I know I could probably dig and figure that out, but yeah, I'll say Neil Peart.
Okay. Good. I like that answer. Once again, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for your time. And just enjoy the rest of the festival.
You as well. Okay. I'm sure we'll have a great time.
For sure. This has been Season 1, Episode 5 of the Metal Gateway Podcast. This project is still relatively new, and it's been something I'm doing just mainly for the fun of it, but also as a gift to the metal community. I've received a number of really nice messages from some of you, and I'm just really grateful for the support and encouragement and enthusiasm that you've expressed. So I just wanted to take a moment here at the halfway point of the season to express my gratitude for all of you. Thanks so much. From the bottom of my heart, really, thank you. Quick reminder that the Metal Gateway Podcast is a sponsor of Northwest Terror Fest this year, which runs from May 9th through the 11th. If you're planning to be at the festival, please come find me and introduce yourself. I would love to say hello. This podcast is a production of Studio Portcullis. Our theme music is by Tauntaun. If you have comments or questions or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show, please email them to me at metalgatewaypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find the show on Instagram @Metal Gateway. Our DMs are open. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.